Gurus and Cost of Quality Lecture Notes. The first quality guru that we'll talk about is W. Edwards Deming, or Ed Deming. He was born in 1900. He grew up in Wyoming. Strangely enough, he graduated from the University of Wyoming and later received a PhD in physics. Now, it's important that you note that he graduated with a degree in physics, not in statistics. During the summers, he worked at the Western Electric's Hawthorne plant in Chicago, which that is a famous place because there's a bunch of studies having to do with varying the levels of light and how it affected workers' performance, and it was just an interesting outcome, so I'm not going to talk about it at this point. He also, when he was at Western Electric, he became acquainted with Walter Ch08, which is really the person who invented SPC charts, which is exam 2B material. In 1940, he became involved with the U.S. Census. He developed statistical sampling techniques. Again, physics, not statistics, but he must have had a penchant for statistics. And he actually went over to Japan to help with the census there. And so later on, he did some teaching in Japan, and people were so impressed with him that he taught for the Union of Japanese Scientists and Engineers in Japan, of course, on quality control methods. He did not accept any payment. Later on, they established a national quality prize called the Deming Prize, which is really pretty unusual because it was a person from the United States that they're honoring, not a fellow Japanese, which there were many great Japanese quality gurus in the time. In 1980, of course, think about this, he's 80 years old at this time. He appeared in a U.S. television documentary entitled If Japan Can, Why Can't We? And it was talking about the quality gap between Japanese products and U.S. products, and it really was something that spurred the emphasis on quality products, freedom from defects that we probably are more familiar with today. I will point out something interesting about Deming is Deming really only focused on interacting with the top management because he felt like they had to be committed to it, and if he started at the lower ranks, it would just die out the whole quality improvement effort. So Deming came up with a number of deadly diseases for businesses as far as things that they should not do. So one of them was an emphasis on short-term profits. He said, looking to increase the quarterly dividend to shareholders undermines quality and productivity. Well, what he's saying is sometimes when you focus on the short term, you sacrifice the long-term growth and viability of the company. Like, for example, let's say that it looks like your sales are down for this quarter. Let's say you're in a printing business. Your sales are down for the quarter. So you say, wow, we really have to boost our sales. What can we do? Well, let's go ahead and sell one of our copying machines. And we can take that and apply it to our sales and make us look good, and the shareholders are going to be happy. But of course, what ends up happening is if you continue that practice, pretty soon you won't have any equipment left and you'll be out of business. Okay. Number 2, evaluation by performance, merit rating, or annual review of performance. And he is against this idea because let's say a department has $10,000 to divide among 2 employees. Make it simple. Well, what ends up happening is having your merit tied to your performance, your pay tied to your performance. What can happen is that the 2 employees compete against each other and try to undermine each other by saying maybe nasty things about each other, refusing to cooperate with each other. And so at the end of the day, it ends up being a less productive department because they're both trying to vie for that performance increase, because they don't necessarily want to get 5,000 and 5,000. One person wants to get 8,000 or 9,000. The other person wants to get 8 or 9,000 of the $10,000 performance merit rating. Mobility of management. That is, of course, moving around, jumping from job to job. And one of the things I would want to point out is excessive costs of warranty fueled by lawyers that work on contingency fees. Now, he does not like that, but there's a benefit and, of course, a detriment to contingency fees from lawyers. On one side, of course, is anybody can sue over perhaps as many trivial things, and so therefore, it ends up being a problem. But on the other side, with big business, they can just bankrupt someone who's trying to pay on their own as they're suing a company for something that is very legitimate. So it's not really just a one thing or the other. Deming's philosophy of management. He has 14 points. We will not talk about all of them, but we'll talk about some of the more important ones. Number 1, create constancy of purpose for improvement of product and service. Explain. Well, constancy of purpose is really more or less saying this is where we're going, this is what we're focusing on improving, and let's make sure that we are doing it. Let's not get distracted by side projects or things that don't necessarily lead to our goal of constancy of purpose for improvement. Basically, stick to it, don't get distracted. Number 3, cease dependence on mass inspection. Why? The why of it is you can inspect and inspect and inspect and inspect, and it doesn't necessarily assure quality. And sometimes it even causes additional problems, because if I know that you're going to check something after I check it, then I may not check it as thoroughly as I should, because I know somebody else will check it more thoroughly later. Of course, that person could have someone else check their stuff later on, and so they say, I don't have to do as good of a job because there'll be somebody else that'll catch it. The other problem is you're checking for problems that have already occurred instead of really focusing on trying to improve the products and services, rather than just trying to check to see how bad they are. All right. Number 4, end the practice of awarding business on price tag alone. Why? Well, think about your computers. You may buy the cheapest computer laptop that you can find, a notebook computer. You may find the cheapest one you can buy it, but it may not work like it should. It may not last as long as it should, because you just bought it on price alone. You have to look at the quality of it. You have to look at how well the company delivers the product to you. Are they shipping it in a reasonable time? A whole bunch of factors just besides price. Number 7, institute leadership. And that's kind of a funny principle or point that he has, but really he's saying a lot of companies do not have leadership. They just kind of manage and try to control things. And so leading consists of helping people do a better job. Deming believed that people want to do a good job, but sometimes there are obstacles that keep them from doing a good job. And if you could focus on eliminating those obstacles or roadblocks, they would do a better job. So again, your job as a leader is to say, what is keeping you from doing a better job, and let's go ahead and figure out how to eliminate that roadblock. Drive out fear. I like the slogan one, eliminate slogans. And the reason I like this one is there are those slogans that you'll see in services and in factory settings that says, do a better job, focus on the important things, quality is number one. Well, what that really is saying to the employees is, we're not really smart enough to know that on our own, so you have to tell us that. So it's really kind of a demeaning sort of statements. Of course, a number of other ones. The second guru that is probably on equal par with Deming. Deming and this Ch08 are probably the two most well-known quality gurus of the transformational period in the 1980s. Deming focused on getting top management to buy into quality improvement as a way of life. Ch08 really focused on how do you develop quality improvement teams and make them effective. And so for me, I was really a big fan of Ch08, perhaps more than Deming. And he was a prolific writer, wrote thousands and thousands of pages of quality books, thousands of pages. Another person, Armin Feigenbaum, he came up with certain principles. There you see him with Bush, George W. Bush. And he had some contributions, and one of the things that he came up with is quality and cost are a sum, not a difference. And so in the past, people thought, well, if you want quality, you got to pay more for it. But it's partly because they didn't really understand what was meant by quality. Quality is really not like features on, let's say, a vehicle. It's really freedom from defects. And so if you can reduce the defects in your processes, both service and manufacturing, is that you are gaining. So what they're really saying is if you can improve your quality, your costs will also go down. So there's a sum factor, not a difference. You don't have to sacrifice one for the other. Philip Crosby came up with this thing called POC and PONC. But he also talked about management commitment as being an improvement strategy. Of course, if you don't have management commitment, guess what? Nothing happens, or it dies out really quickly. It's like, well, let's go ahead. This is kind of the program of the day, and let's do it for the next few months. And after it fails, we'll go ahead and try something new, and hopefully that will solve our problem. But then it won't, so we'll change to something new. And so that's really the whole cycle. There is a video that I will try to put into the ReggieNet videos about Lucy at the Chocolate Factory. It's a pretty entertaining one, and it really talks about trying to increase quotas by speeding up the production line. So I'll leave that one to you to look at.